Okay. All right. So that's a good question, Moaz. The question is what to do for the term paper. And
Fantastic. Yeah.
what I was thinking, like 12 o'clock high covers a good number of management issues. Uh, some of these, like leadership, plays a big role in the film. Emotional management plays a big role in the film. Uh, Stress management, which we're not really covering, but is related, also plays a big role in the film. Organizational culture and changing a culture is really what the movie's about. And this idea of organizational change and organizational culture, we're going to discuss a little later in the semester. Well, more towards the end of the semester, but you can read in advance if you're interested in the top topics like organizational culture, organizational structure. I think there are also, the stuff we were talking about last week, organizational change. I'm sorry, management of emotions, emotional management, emotional labor, reframing, all of these tactics, all these questions play a big role in the movie. So what I had in mind is that you would pick one of the areas that intrigues you or interests you. I think what you should do is start from the conceptual content, not from the movie. Watch the movie a couple of times, but start from the conceptual content in the textbook, which is abstract. It's very abstract material for me. I prefer, I was an undergraduate, I was a philosophy major, so I don't mind abstraction, but I teach business. I worked for a big part of my life is in business, and I'm more concerned with the real world. So what I want you to do is take the conceptual stuff from the textbook and then bring it down to the movie, bring it down to earth, although they're flyers in a movie, but bring it down to earth. And how does the movie illustrate these concepts? All right, so you can start, say, with emotional labor. I think there's a lot in that movie. One or two people answered the bonus question I raised about how emotional labor plays out in 12 o'clock high. And if you look at the email I sent, I give you that person's answer. It was very good. I forget who it was, but it was a very good answer. And basically, reading the material on emotional labor and emotions in the workplace, how does this movie illustrate the issues with emotional labor, and also, like, how can you make an analogy between the extraordinary and extreme environment in which those guys were working with how we work? I think that I once had a student who said she felt guilty watching 12 o'clock high in a business class because what they had done was so special and so, extreme, and what they had done was so difficult that we really don't hold a candle to it. We're not the same. But that may be true to a degree, but it's also true that in a more extreme way, it illustrates a lot of the issues facing business. I think one thing, for example, is like in changing culture and reframing the emotions, in revising the organizational structure in some ways. He changed the leader, he changed the ground exec, he promoted Stovall, and he moved around a lot of people. He arrested Gately and then humiliated him. Uh, what are all these things doing as far as organizational change? What are they doing as far as changing the culture? And also, like, I think the first chapter, the first thing we discussed on personality, I mean, you could bring in a lot of that, like how does personality influence the performance and eventual breakdown of Savage? And is it true that there's no difference between Savage and Davenport? I think there's a lot of really interesting questions you can ask about all of it, a lot of the subject, not all of them, but a lot of the subjects we're talking about. A big part of it is leadership, and I think one way I've used this movie a lot in my classes is when we get to the leadership stuff, your book talks about Fiedler's contingency theory, which I was glad to see because it often gets overlooked. It's really the origin of contingency theories. And Fiedler's contingency theory is like really almost like perfectly illustrated. The movie almost illustrates it point for point. So basically what you can do is like read the stuff on Fiedler's contingency theory. So you let's say you do that, so you start out describing the theory that you're using. So what is Fiedler's contingency theory? I'm not going to talk about it right now, but you can look it up. So you briefly describe what Fiedler's contingency theory is, and then you say why this movie illustrates Fiedler's contingency theory. And then you in the second paragraph, you give several points about to defend your claim. So you say, for example, first of all, Davenport was socio-emotionally or relations-oriented, whereas Savage was task-oriented. The reason, and you prove that by showing that Davenport loved his least preferred coworker, Zimmerman, the navigator who caused the plane to crash, who caused them to lose several planes, I mean. And then Savage, on the other hand, had like nobody. He didn't care about anybody. Of course, that wasn't true, but that's how he behaved. Savage focused on the task completely, whereas Davenport put a lot of weight on emotions, to the point where Savage says he's guilty of over-identification with the men. Okay. He then not only focuses on the task, but focuses on all kinds of organizational building related to task issues, training, identifying leadership, motivating, organizational restructuring, personnel changes. He focuses on all kinds of task-related questions. And what Fiedler says is that the difficulty of the situation determines whether or not a relations-oriented or a task-oriented leadership style is more appropriate. And in this film, I think you'll have to agree that this was a situation of extreme task difficulty. So what Fiedler predicts is that in a situation of extreme task difficulty, or the opposite, extreme ease, easy, very easy and very difficult, both require the same kind of leadership, that you want to have a task-focused leader. So basically, this kind of leadership style worked much better than the relations-oriented. And this is precisely what Fiedler predicts. So use the story in the movie and then conclude the task-oriented leadership style, which is what Fiedler predicts will work better in a difficult situation, worked better in the storyline. Now, I have a few pointers about the history behind the movie that I think I put in the syllabus, but basically the background of it was that the United States didn't have a lot of military equipment or personnel in between the wars. Woodrow Wilson said World War I was a war to end all wars. There was a strong isolationist push from the Republicans, and basically we kind of stayed away from international affairs to a larger. We weren't really isolationists, but it was kind of a period of American unilateralism, not unlike what Trump was advocating. He was advocating a return to that. And so basically, we didn't build up our military at all. And when necessity struck, in the case of Hitler, we, like Britain also, and a number of other countries, we had to build up our military and create a military. So this was a case of entrepreneurship, in effect. There was no Air Force. This was when the Air Force was a division of the Army. They call it the Army Air Forces. And so the guys that wrote the movie knew about a number of the commanders, and they based the characters on real people. So one of them was the famous and notorious Curtis LeMay, who later became commander-in-chief of the Air Force. And LeMay is, when we watch The Fog of War later in the semester, which is the movie about, it's the interview of Robert McNamara by, what's his name, that famous Errol Morris. And The Fog of War is about McNamara's life, and part of his life was that he had served as a colonel under, no, not under, but alongside LeMay. McNamara was a professor at Harvard and was a statistician, among other things. And he was part of a unit that was planning the Air Force. And they were the ones that created the rule that you bomb at 9,000 feet. And it may have been 5,000. I've heard different versions of it. But basically, he talks about this, and he talks about how they made the decision to do this with LeMay, and people were getting killed because they were bombing at a low altitude, like much lower than the planes could fly at. But the thing was, they would do it in one sortie, whereas if they had flown high, they would have had to do multiple sorties, and so more people would have been killed. And it was hard for the pilots to understand this because, well, for understandable reasons. I mean, they were, in the heat of being shot at by fighters and by ground artillery. So basically, they had to sell this kind of decision, and LeMay had a lot of the attributes of Savage. So basically, he was removed from Europe and sent to the Pacific, where he led the fight on Japan. And McNamara talks about this. And McNamara says about LeMay that when he went to Japan, he told them that if any pilot turns back, they will be arrested. And that's exactly what happened to Ben Gately in the story. And he said he would lead every mission. LeMay himself, he was a warrior. He would lead every mission. And if they were afraid of getting killed, he had no pity for them because he had the same fear. And that was the kind of, but the real person that this character was based on was a guy named Colonel Armstrong, who was called in to revise a flagging unit in Europe, and basically co-piloted with who was then Colonel Tibbets, who was later the guy who also went to Japan, who also went to the Pacific. Tibbets became famous as the guy who dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, which is a story for another day. But basically, these were the guys flying in these early missions over Europe, over really France and then Germany. And basically, the characters were based on these real guys. So what they were trying to show you is how it really happened. And when LeMay was promoted to higher stations in the Air Force after the war, he told the Air Force Academy in Colorado that they should use 12 o'clock high for training. So that this movie was actually used for training. And you can see in this story a lot of the elements of organizational change, leadership, and it's not just Fiedler's Contingency. If you read the chapter on leadership, there's a lot of other stuff related to leadership that relates to the movie. Culture change, conflict. So all of these are elements that you can write about. I don't know, Muez, does that answer your question?
Yes, Professor, that answer my question, Professor. Thank you so much.
You're
But
welcome.
Professor, I also have another question.
Okay.
Right, speaking about it, right? The movie's so long, and whatever you explained to us sounds great, to be honest with you, but how could we all squeeze it to one page?
Well, you don't have to write about the whole movie. One thing you need to learn is how to edit and just use information relevant to your point. So the idea in writing a paper, and this is just one page, I know, but it's the same whether you write a 50-page paper or one-page paper, that you start out with a thesis. So you take one thing that you want to write about. You give a few facts that support your claim. Your goal is not to summarize the movie. You don't have to rewrite the screenplay. You can get the screenplay online if you want. You can read it right online if you wish. So basically, your goal is not to tell the whole movie. Your goal is to prove a point that you want to prove based on the movie.
That sounds great. So basically, take a point from the movie, and based on the point, whatever I want to. Basically, the point I'm from the movie is basically going to be from whatever you're studying technically in this class.
So take a point from the textbook. Take a point from an idea from the textbook, and take a point or 2 points from the movie, and use them to show how that illustrates the textbook theory.
So basically, you got to, and then after that, you got to complete just one page. If it's 2 pages, you're not going to take it, right?
No 2 pages, 1 page. There's no.
Right.
If you go a line or two over, I don't care. But if it's another half a page, that's no good.
I got it. Professor, for the paper, right? We don't have to put our name, right? The class name, whatever. We got to go straight and write basically the paper, right?
So you have a cover page with your name and the course number, and then the paper. So it's 2 pages. Just a cover.
Right, fantastic. Now I got it. Now I understand. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You really answered my question. I appreciate you.
Great. Okay, any other questions before we get started? Tonight we have an interesting bit of stuff on perception and ethics. And this material is great. I think the practical implication of perception is fairly straightforward. I wanted you to watch Rashomon in part because you'll never forget it, in part because it illustrates the main point of perception beautifully. And the main point is that nothing can be believed. Okay, you have to be really careful. Another movie that illustrates this concept is The Godfather, parts 1 and 2, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend. Great New York movie. And at several points in this movie, the Godfather, more the Al Pacino character than the Marlon Brando character, intuits who's tried to kill him, or who's playing a game, or that his brother betrayed him. And the question is, how does someone intuit this kind of clouded deception? And that's really what Rashomon is about. It's about how we really can't know. We never know. And McNamara talks about this too. I'm sure he saw the movie, and it's nothing new when he was talking about it. But basically, we do not know anything for sure. What we know is what we perceive, and our beliefs often influence our perceptions. And that's true to a much greater degree than people want to believe. So we're in large part governed by our preconceptions. A more kind of higher level version of this is called selective perception in psychology. That basically we see the things that we've been trained to see. So when we see a spaceship, we see a spaceship, we know what it is. If we come from a primitive tribe and they see a spaceship, they see something else. Their perception is real to them, just as our perception is real to us. We all have, someone asked me, well, someone emailed me, they don't get like where in business, government, and I forget what else I said. There are Rashomon effects, which is a term that's often used to mean that people see things in totally different ways. And I think pretty much everything on the news is a Rashomon effect. I think we live in a Rashomon world. Basically, there are two political parties which hate each other, and both thinks the other one is a traitor, for example. So that's Rashomon. I mean, when you look at Wall Street, there are two types of investors, bulls and bears. Who knows what those are? Who knows what a bull and a bear is? Anyone want to jump in with that?
Yeah, a bull is when the market's doing really well and they want the bull, they want it to charge forward. Bear is when no one can bear it, and I mean that's a joke, but seriously speaking, it's when the market crashes down, like during the COVID recession, '08, etc. They want it to not do well short.
Okay, very good. Excellent answer. So basically, what's happening to the market right now? Up or down? I don't mean day by day, I mean for the last couple of months. Nobody?
The market's down, right, Professor?
Yeah, it's been going down. Very good.
And yeah, I've been looking to it because I've been investing lately. Like I've been putting money onto the market, to be honest with you. Not much, but I'm investing in good stock, good companies, such as Nike
good,
and
that's right.
AMD. So I'm putting.
There's a
What is it?
famous expression attributed to Rothschild: buy when there's blood in the streets. Okay, so when the market's down, it's the time to buy. When the market's up, it's the time to sell.
Oh,
But that's the exact reverse of what most people do. When they see it's been good for a while, they start to buy. When it's crashing, they say, "Oh, I got to get out of this," and they sell. So most people don't do well. To do well, you gotta buy when the market's falling. There's a very good book if you're interested in the stock market.
what is it? What is it called?
I'll put it on the screen share. Uh, it's called The Most Important Thing. By Howard Marks. Marks is a billionaire investor. He's one of these big time investors. And the other book, while I'm recommending books about the stock market, the other one is The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, who was the teacher of, anyone know who he's the teacher of, whom he was the teacher of, anyone? I don't hear anyone, of Warren Buffett. He was Warren Buffett's professor. And Buffett actually went to work for Graham when he was very young, and learned his style and how he operates from Graham. And a lot of what Buffett has done has just been to elaborate on Graham. Graham was a very good investor. He's an excellent investor. He made a lot of money. Buffett is probably the greatest investor of all time. But like Newton said about if I've seen so far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And that's kind of the relationship between the two. So basically, The Intelligent Investor is well worth reading for anyone interested in investing as a part of their life. I'm not saying if you're going to work on Wall Street, then you have to go further and read more. But if you're going to invest and work, and these are two great books to read. And Marx was influenced by Graham. He's also a value investor. But the thing is, like what Marx talks about in there is how to be good at investing, you have to do the opposite of follow the herd. If you're somebody who likes to conform and do what everyone else is doing, you'll probably never be a good investor. If you do what they're telling you on TV and you say, oh, everybody else is buying this, so I'm going to buy it.
You're not invested like this. You only just follow people.
Yeah.
You're not an investor. You just following people. You got to show us. You got to make your own research and everything.
That's
what
right.
I mean?
That's right. You got to think for yourself, and you got to often do. There are people who call themselves contrarians, who say, well, if everybody's saying buy, I'm going to sell. If everybody's saying sell, I'm going to buy. So, and there's another expression while I'm talking about stock market cliches and stuff, that the stock market is driven by two emotions, fear and greed. And when everybody is fearful, you should be greedy. And when everybody is greedy, you should be fearful. Okay, so you do the opposite of what there's. So basically, I remember around 2000, when the market, there was this crazy internet bubble, and a lot of the internet stocks went to incredibly high valuations. And they were saying, oh, it's going to go on forever, it's going to keep going up. And that was the time to sell. If you sold then, you were smart. The same thing with Enron that we looked at. That stock had shot up, like it was selling many times its earnings. And the smart investors stayed away, but the very smartest investor, Jim Chanos, shorted it. He shorted the stock and made a huge amount of money. He was the one that broke the story. He shorted the stock and he released the information to the media, to the Wall Street Journal, and they then built the story up. So basically, perception is incredibly important, and I think our perceptions are heavily influenced by those around us. That leaves us to the question, is there such a thing as objective reality? Are we totally based on illusion? That question was raised by the great philosopher David Hume. I think I mentioned him last time. And Hume argued that we can't know, there's really no way to know anything. That basically what we call cause and effect is really just the constant conjunction of two things. you really don't know that one thing causes another. It could just be an accident that they come together. That personal identity is illusory. That we're a different person now than we were when we were children. We're different from how we were 5 years ago. We're different from how we'll be in 10 years. And to say that we're one person is just an assumption based on optical illusions and memories. So that argument is difficult to overcome, and it was elaborated early in the 20th century by a guy named G.E. Moore, who argued against the idea that there's such a thing as natural ethics, natural law, natural ethics, that ethics can't really appear in nature, but rather are constructions we impose on the world. And he called it the naturalistic fallacy. This kind of idea is associated with the scientific movement known as positivism. And when we talk about science, basically, we're really talking about positivism. Science that's based on things other than positivism are ideological or based on belief. These are not the ideas that caused advances in physics or advances in chemistry or advances in biology. These kinds of advances came from the positivist approach to physics, to science. So if you're going to buy into that and say, well, science is special, you have to also accept that science has to be based on skepticism. And the purpose of science is to not prove yourself right, but to test ideas and to prove them wrong. This is what the philosopher Karl Popper called falsification in his famous book, The Logic of Scientific Discovery. So basically, the Humean argument, in my opinion, has not really been overcome. The great philosopher Immanuel Kant, who lived a little bit around the same time, a little bit after Hume, responded to Hume with a book called The Critique of Pure Reason. And he also wrote a lot of books on unrelated subjects, and another one, the Critique of Practical Reason. And basically, he argues that although you can't know the thing in itself, you can't know the world as God sees it. You can know the world as we all see it, because the possibility of knowing is a precondition for our perceptions. And so we all share the same precondition, which is called the categories of reason. And since our minds are governed by the categories of reason, we can all see things the same way and have an objective reality, in the sense that we all share this objective reality. I don't think that argument overcomes Hume's argument. That's what he wanted to do, because as he says, you can't know the thing in itself. You can only know our shared perception of it. This was also applied to ethics. And Hume, so Hume does away with science and individual identity. So needless to say, he makes short shrift of ethics. And he basically says ethics is pure emotion. There's no reason in it. The reason we feel ethically, we have ethical thoughts or beliefs, is that we react to things emotionally. Well, as it turns out, and your book points out, Hume was right. When psychologists study ethics, they find it's based on emotional responses. Ethics are largely emotional responses. Kant wanted to claim that, and this goes back to Plato and Descartes, that ethics is based on reason. And Descartes claimed that the existence of God validates our perceptions. And so we wouldn't perceive these things if there were no God. And therefore, our perceptions and our ethical beliefs exist because of the imprint of God. I'm probably not doing total justice to it. That's the idea. So basically, Hume said baloney, that there's no such thing as any of this old assumptions. Kant wanted to reinstate that point of view by saying our ethics are based on reason, and we see instantaneously whether something is ethical or not based on the categorical imperatives, the categories of practical reason, if you will. And the categorical imperatives in Kant's view were three, and the most important ones were that the three were, first of all, we should always treat other people as though they are ends in themselves, and we shouldn't use other people as means to an end. Second of all, we should always act as though our actions are a universal law. And third of all, that we should treat other people as members of a kingdom of ends in themselves. So we're all part of a human community, that all of whom are ends in themselves. And basically, Kant claimed that these standards govern all ethical thinking. I don't think his framework really overcomes Hume's objections. And this isn't a philosophy class, so I'll leave it at that. I probably did more philosophy than I should have. But basically, I don't think Kant's arguments really hold up against Hume's. And so, we're left with this thing that we share perceptions, maybe we share some ethical beliefs, but whether they're ultimately true or false, we can never know. And this is the basis of science, because science says we don't know, but we're going to do our best to find out what's false and use working hypotheses to test. And the ones that seem to work, we're going to accept as rules until we can overthrow them with better rules. And the great historian Thomas Kuhn argued in his great classic book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and I'll put that on the screen too, that science is a long sequence of scientific revolutions. And science succeeds when it doesn't try to overthrow its assumptions, but rather it works the best when a given paradigm, and this is the term paradigm is often used, this is where it comes from. That's why people use it all the time, because Kuhn, it comes from Kuhn, not that the word didn't exist before, but he's the one that put it on the map, that the great scientists like Newton create a paradigm, a set of a body of knowledge that starts out with certain assumptions and are proved, and then are tested using certain kinds of instruments. And the paradigm includes not just the theories, but the kinds of instruments and the kinds of questions asked. And the role of the scientist is to test. And Popper later said that the role of the scientist is to falsify the paradigm, not to prove it. Although they themselves may consider themselves proving it, and maybe they can't even get published if they don't prove it. But the real function is to falsify it. And ultimately, enough contradictions accumulate that there's a breakthrough, there's a revolution, and Einstein steps in and shows us why a straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points, or why we're governed by a different kind of physics than Newton proposed. So basically, what this leaves us with, perhaps you can say with certainty, that there are certain accumulated, we know that the earth is not flat, because we have pictures of it, that we reach a certain degree of certainty. But it seems to me that Kuhn, he sort of says towards the end, well, you can reach a degree of certainty, but it seems to me that no paradigm is ever finally established, and that the history of science has been and will be, and this goes back to the ancient primitive tribes that predate history, that it'll always be an evolution, that there'll always be new breakthroughs and maybe the atom theory of substances will be overturned by something else eventually. We don't really know what the future will bring. So basically, getting this kind of very abstract talk back to the reality of Rashomon and perceptions, I would say that given all the skepticism I'm talking about, we should bring it to bear in our business dealings, that we should be skeptical of the claims of investment bankers that this stock is the best one that's ever been sold. If someone's trying to sell us a corporation, we need to look under the hood and do research. If somebody speaks ill of a coworker, we need to be skeptical and not believe the rumor or the innuendo, and try to discover what's really true. All right, so basically your book proposes a simple model that the perceiver and the object and the situation are all influences on perceptions. So we as perceivers bring into the context of our perception attitudes, values, personality traits, motives. In my afternoon class today, they got into a big debate whether Kanye West is crazy. I'm not sure who won the debate. I'm not a follower particularly, so I wasn't sure, but some students believed he was, other students claimed he wasn't. But the main point was that creative people are often crazy. And so, we bring to the world our personality, our way of perceiving, our motives, our interests, our experiences, and so on. And somebody like Tesla, Nikola Tesla, why is it that Tesla could envision AC electricity, the AC induction system, the AC motor that drives most of the modern world? How could he see this when no one else could? Why is it that he was able to see that you could communicate with radio waves before anyone else? And it was really Tesla who invented radio and television, although Marconi and others built on his perception. Marconi got credit for it, but it was really Tesla who showed it was possible. And so why is it that someone like that, is it just because he's got some kind of perceptual damage that leads him to see things in a different way from everybody else? Or I don't know, but there are definitely differences in perception. And this idea of the autistic person who there have been cases where, like, there were these two brothers decades ago who, if you gave them a date, they could tell you the day of the week. So if you said like July 14th, 1366, they could tell you what day of the week it was, and they'd be right every time. How they could do it, and they were autistic, how they could do it, nobody knows. So in other words, there's dimensions of perception that we don't understand. There's no question of that. But how you bring it out in yourself and how you learn to evaluate and judge your own perceptions is another story. So basically, what influences the situation? It might be something like how the perceived object relates to the background. If there's something moving against the backdrop that's still, you'll notice the moving object. if there's something little among things that are somewhat bigger, or something bigger among things that, so differences make often make us perceive things. Okay. A lot of our biases, our selective perception and our perceptual biases have to do with attribution. Whenever there's a president in office, if they're a Democrat, the Republicans say, oh, they caused the stock market to crash. If they're Republican, if they're a Democrat, I'm sorry, if they're Republican, then the Democrats say the same thing. Or, oh, the president caused the economy to fall. In reality, who the president is doesn't cause the stock market to go up and down. That's really not the force. What causes the stock market to go up and down is interest rates. And supposedly they're independent of the president, not totally, but in theory. So why do we attribute, a big question is, why do we attribute something to internal or external causes? Fundamental attribution error, a very useful idea. We tend to attribute bad things that happen to other people to their own actions, and we tend to attribute bad things that happen to us to circumstances. So we're all a little bit of a narcissist, let's say. So if something bad happens to somebody else, we tend to say that's their own fault. If something bad happens to us, we tend to say it's the environment, it's not our fault. Attributions are based on three factors as far as attributing to either internal or external causation. Distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Distinctiveness means that somebody behaves differently in a different situation. So if you're able to observe somebody's behavior in 5 situations, and in only one of them does that person do the thing they do, we would tend to attribute that to the situation. Okay, consensus is that everyone in the same situation behaves the same. In that case, we would view the situation as being the cause. So like everybody goes back into the building on 9/11, that's the situation. They were told it was okay. They weren't suicidal. Okay, third of all, consistency. If an individual does the same thing over and over again, then it's them. If they change with the situation, then it's not them. Okay, so we tend to blame people if they behave differently in a given situation than if they do the same thing. I'm sorry, we tend to blame people if they do the same thing over and over, rather than if they do something different in a different situation. All right, so when we judge others, so part of it is this attribution error and fundamental attribution error, and these factors that influence attribution. But we use a lot of other shortcuts in evaluating other people. Selective perception is a very useful concept. It means we only see certain things, forgetting, the stuff that Hume talks about. We're just getting back down to earth. Even given what's available to us, even what we can see, we often don't. Okay, we perceive the things that are most salient, that jump out at us, that have the most meaning. So there's somebody in a crowd, you look at that person, and you don't see the guy with the knife about to stab you in the throat. All right, so basically selective perception means our attention span is driven in a certain way. There's a stock that's been going up every day for a year. Everybody's talking about it. The media is talking about it. Your stockbroker is telling you to buy it. So what do? Well, if you're like most people, you buy it. The trouble is that it's only their selective perception that's causing them to look at that stock. The stocks you should be looking at are the ones that you don't hear about in the media that have good potential. Okay, so basically, selective perception. We see what we uh, what our expectations and training cause us to see. Somebody once said to somebody who has a hammer, everything is a nail. Maybe that's a slight overstatement, but that's the idea. There's also something called perceptual defense, which is kind of the reverse of that, which is that in perceptual defense, there's information that's so jarring, that's so dissonant to your expectations that you don't perceive it. You rule it out. And this often happens too. And that's also like, oh, that can't be true. Oh, Joe couldn't be stealing from the company. He's been here for 30 years and he's a good friend of mine. You know, he was stealing from the company. You know, so basically, often our preconceptions govern our perceptions. In evaluating other people, there's a host of issues. And when I teach stuff related to HR, I talk a lot about performance appraisal and biases that are introduced in performance appraisal. And these include things like the halo effect, that there's one thing that we like about somebody. And so we like everything about that person. We give them all excellence. For instance, I care a lot about somebody being a good dresser. So they come to work well dressed. And so I give them excellent on job performance and on productivity and so on, because they're good dressers. That's the halo effect. The horn effect is the reverse. There's one thing I can't stand. So they come in messy. They're dressed in a messy way. And I give them all unsatisfactories, even though they're good performers. They're a better performer than the neat guy. But the neat guy is neat. And I like neat people. I don't like messy people. Recency error. We tend to value things more recently, things that occurred more recently than things that happened long ago. For instance, if I'm evaluating an employee over a year, if they do something a year ago, I have less memory and less weight on that than if they do something a week before the performance appraisal. So what a smart employee do if there's some bad news or they did something wrong, they hide it until after the performance appraisal. So that way the boss has a year to forget about it. So there are quite a few things that influence performance appraisals, which is why they're rarely valid. Now, a big factor that influences how people behave is expectations of their performance. So if I set a high bar, and this is also related to the idea of cognitive dissonance, I think I've mentioned before that, you know, in 12 O'Clock High, I love the example of Ben Gately, where Savage demotes Gately from air exec to pilot, and then he tells him to put leper colony on the plane, and he's going to send every loser to his staff. So the worst navigator, the worst bombardier, etc. And so basically what he's trying to do is humiliate him to the point where he's motivated to prove him wrong, where he becomes very motivated to prove him wrong. And in the story, that's what happens. So it worked there. So basically, towards the middle of the movie, sometime after the middle of the movie, he's in the, Gately turns out to be in the hospital. Savage hears about it. And what happened was his spine had been injured and he flew despite being in great pain. And he was in such intense pain that he collapsed and was hospitalized, and they had him in traction. And Savage goes there and basically makes peace with him, you know. and after that, he views Gately in one of the last scenes. He makes it clear that he wants Gately to lead, that he thinks now Gately has proven himself. And this idea of cognitive dissonance, that we can use conflict within ourselves to motivate us to succeed. It kind of contradicts the idea that job satisfaction leads to performance, because like if we're motivated by cognitive dissonance, of an emotion like anger or frustration can lead to high achievement. Imagine how Marie Curie felt when she was trying to prove that radium was radioactive, and no one would believe her, and she and her husband spent a year or more just sifting through radium day after day after day to prove. Do you think that she was satisfied in that time? Or was that just a Herculean effort overcoming the worst kind of frustration? And eventually they proved it. And this created a whole new understanding of radioactivity and so on. So basically, we are heavily influenced by expectations that are given to us. And it can be shown that expectations about performance on an exam, on an IQ test, on all kinds of stuff are influenced by the expectations people to communicate to us. So a lot of people's performance sociologically is going to be related to the expectations that they've been told people have of them. And this is very important. Okay, so we want to set forth to people that we, if we want them to be performers, that we have high expectations. All right, so common biases that people have. We all have these perceptual biases. Now, I was talking on a very deep fundamental level that we can't know reality. But even given our knowledge of reality, there are a lot of things that distort our reality, both socially and even in terms of objective things. So, for example, overconfidence. A lot of people tend to overestimate their own abilities. Anchoring. We tend to focus on initial information. This kind of distortion is like one of the big problems in the job market. Basically, the HR people, what they do is they often ask people, what was your salary on your last job? And that should not be an issue. What should be an issue is what is your productivity rate on your future job, not what you earned on your last job. And yet they want to anchor the salary so that they have a guideline. And this is just a simple perceptual bias. It's not economic. There's no economic reality to it whatsoever. We tend to base judgments on the information available to us. And we'll often think that because we had information available to us, we should conclude what this information tells us. But it may be that other information completely contradicts the available information. Escalation of commitment. One of the biggest fallacies in business is escalation of commitment, also known as sunk costs, that we've invested $1 million in this, so we can't give up the project. That's wrong. Just because you've got a past investment doesn't mean you should continue the project. It may be wasted $1 million, but you'll never get it back. And if you invest more, you'll lose more. Okay, wait a second. I bought 1,000 shares of this stock at 50. Now it's 2. Maybe I should buy another 20,000. Maybe not, because the stock may be for a company that's going bankrupt. You have to ask yourself, what is the company really doing? I didn't buy into a lot of the bubble in 2000. I'm not a bubble type person, but at the very end of the bubble, this company, WorldCom, had fallen from, God, I don't know what, 150, say, whatever it was, I have to look it up, down to 2. And a guy got on TV, a guy from Sanford Bernstein, which is a portfolio managing firm. And he got on TV and he said he's positive that WorldCom isn't going bankrupt. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take a shot. So I bought 500 shares for $1,000, and the firm went bankrupt a week later. Okay, so basically, he was full of shit, but also the fact that the stock had been high and then it was low meant absolutely nothing for the firm's future. That's really not a reason to buy it or not to buy it. Okay, we also make a lot of mistakes based on randomness. You know, we just see something arbitrarily and we assume that it's real, that it means something. For example, in the movie, I forget which Chaplin movie it was. It's about a serial killer. I'm trying to remember. There's a character who says, "I won the lottery." Not anyone could do that. Okay. So basically, in her mind, she was someone special because she had won the lottery. Of course, it's purely due to random. And this is characteristic. I mean, you know, anyone will make a mistake like this. Like, oh, I got this great job because you know, I'm talented, but really maybe it was just a matter of luck. You know, this happens all the time. You see it all the time. Risk aversion. We'll often make bad decisions because we're afraid of taking a risk. Hindsight bias. We think if we had been there, we would have known better. If I had been alive in 1929 for the great crash of 1929, I would have sold short, just like Jesse Livermore. Or if I were around in 2000 with Jim Chanos, I would have also known to sell Enron. Maybe, maybe not, probably not. Okay, just because we can read about the history of something doesn't mean we would have made the right decision from the other's perspective, from the future perspective. We have a lot of trouble making decisions, and a lot of the time spent on decisions is wasted. Managers report that they spend 31% of their time on decision making, but less than half their time is spent usefully. Okay, and a lot of this has to do with all these perceptual biases and difficulties. Graham Allison was the head of the Harvard School of Government in the 1960s, and I think it was the 60s, and he wrote this famous book, Essence of Decision. He wrote it about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I got to check now. Now I'm like torturing myself. All right, we'll talk about it later. I can't help myself. I have to check. Graham Allison, years at Harvard. Just have to know whether it was the 60s. Oh no, yeah, well, okay, so he's still there, and he started in 67. He started in 72. So yeah, so I was wrong. Essence of Decision, I wasn't far off. He published it in 71, so I wasn't far off about that. But basically, so anyway, he says that there were three kinds of ways that organizations make decisions. rational actor, bounded rationality, and political. And the rational actor model is that the model that economists will use, that firms maximize profit based on equilibration of marginal cost and marginal revenue, that they'll trade off resources until the marginal rate of substitution for all inputs is equal, that they'll be completely rational. They maximize profit based on efficiency. The bounded rationality model came from the famous book by Herbert March and James Simon, Organizations. I was just talking about this afternoon also. And what they said is that all these cognitive biases and cognitive blocks and mental shortfalls that I'm talking about limit our possibility of rationality, so that we can't possibly be rational. And instead we make decisions based on partial knowledge, benchmarks, and what they call satisficing, that we set up an arbitrary rule and we guide ourselves by this arbitrary rule. For instance, we'll accept a project if it has a rate of return above 15%. But if we look for the optimal project, we might find that there are projects with much higher rates of return, but we'll stop our search when we find one for 15%. So in other words, the context and the structure of decision-making means that we can never really be fully rational. The search costs and the information costs are too high. And so they call this accepting a certain level, not optimizing, but satisficing. And so we limit the extent to which we need to be dependent on perceptual objectivity, because our perceptual ability is limited. This was based, and they admitted in the last chapter of the book, this was based on the Austrian economists Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, who argued that socialism can never work because the information constraints are too great. That, in other words, the amount of rationality required to orchestrate an entire economy is so big that it can't possibly be approached by any group or individual. That even with the highest speed computers, the amount of information is unattainable. Part of it's because a lot of the information is unknowable, things like unrealized, unrevealed preferences of consumers that a central planner can't possibly anticipate. But it also is that the coordination among economic institutions can only be accomplished through the interplay of supply and demand as reflected in price levels. So if goods become in short supply, let's say like oil became recently, that the price will go up and will force consumers to ration their use of oil by not consuming as much. So basically, a planner could never anticipate a price fluctuation like that. A planner could never have expected what Putin did, or could never understood what the effects of the environmental regulations would be on investment in oil, and therefore the creation of shortages. As a matter of fact, it's much more likely that the central planner would be part of the political movement to reduce investment in oil, that they would be friendly to it, and so would have overstated what occurred because of their perceptual biases. That's why back in the early 90s, there were experts, including some at the Harvard School of Government that I just mentioned, who were advocating that America adopted industrial policy because Japan had an industrial policy, and they were more successful at that time than we were. Well, what happened was the industrial policy turned out to be completely wrong, and the Japanese economy collapsed, and they've been flagging for the last 35 years, their economy for the last 32 years, since 90. And basically they've never recovered. And the reason is their industrial policy and the regulation they have. And so basically, you would think that, as scientists, the advocates of industrial policy would have said, oh, wait a second, we were wrong. Japan failed. It never really came back. It hasn't been the economic force it was in the 80s. And, we were wrong. But guess what? No, they don't say that. No, there's no interest in reforming it. They look for new arguments why we should have industrial policy, even though Japan failed. So basically, and again, this is another form of perceptual bias. The great book by John Haidt, The Righteous Mind, talks about this, how we all of us, without exception, try to confirm our biases rather than look for the truth. And any time there's a discussion about morals, politics, anything value driven, there's never a conclusion to it, because and the smarter you are, the more likely you won't be convinced by opposing arguments, no matter how accurate they are. Rather, you'll look for confirmatory evidence of your own point of view. And that, again, this is directly related to the kind of perceptual biases I'm talking about. All right, what influences decision-making? Personality, IQ, mental ability, cultural background. IQ doesn't cure safe-serving bias and overconfidence, but it is associated with flexibility and selecting the best problem-solving strategy. Okay, so people with higher IQs tend to be better at solving problems, but they're just as biased, if not more so, than less capable people. Organizational constraints on decision-making are very important. So things like organizational rules, performance appraisal, regulations, time constraints, culture, all of these things will affect the way decisions are made on top of our perceptual biases. Now, moving into ethics, I kind of talked about this already. I'll get into it a little bit more. Your book talks about 3 ethical criteria: utilitarianism, what they call deonance, which is duty-based. You can also call it deontology, and legally derived rights. Okay, basically, the basic idea of modern ethics is that you're either going to maximize social welfare by doing what you do. So what you do is justified because more people benefit than are hurt. And secondly, the deontology view that you do what you do because it's your duty. So there are specific objective duties that you have, and you comply with those duties. So when I was talking about Kant's categorical imperatives, those are duties. You have a duty to treat people as ends and not means. You have a duty to act as though your action is a universal law. All right, where does that duty come from? You see, so basically the Kantian argument is an infinite regress. He says, well, the categorical imperatives drive our moral thinking, but what makes the categorical imperatives moral? He can't really prove that they are. So it doesn't really solve the Humean argument. So basically, I think, a big question is, to what degree should morality be introduced into business decision-making? We've seen a great deal of this in recent years. A lot of companies are talking a lot about social responsibility, about the importance of not just organizational citizenship behavior, but rather of being concerned with stakeholders beyond stockholders, being concerned with the people around us, the people in the community, people who are hurt if your company moves out of a town, the businesses that get shut down. And so we should, rather than view the stockholders as your main concern, you should view communities as your main concern. This seems to me, there was a famous article in the 60s by Milton Friedman, and he wrote in the New York Times magazine back then, the social responsibility of business is to make a profit. Okay, and there's I have one big problem with the CSR concept, and that is that the stockholders took their own money, which they worked really hard for, and they invested it in the company in pursuit of a return. And you would think that because the company can only exist because of these investments, that the company must owe special consideration to the people who've risked their hard-earned money to support and invest in the company. And what the CSR argument is no, these people are just greedy pigs, and instead we should honor the man on the street who's virtuous because he's poor, and these greedy pigs who worked hard and invested their money because they have some money, we should, disregard them and instead worry about the person in the street. And to me, this is highly unethical. I don't consider this to be ethics at all. That basically, if somebody does you a good, that you need to balance that good. And the concept of fiduciary duty to the shareholders is how you balance their investment. They risk their money to invest in you. So, this gets us back to, is there such a thing as morality? Because like the morality that I am seeing in America in the recent years is, to me, a pathetic one, not one that can really generate economic development, because it disregards fundamental fairness. How can you say you're being fair to a stockholder if you say you're going to treat the man or woman on the street equally to the people that risk their capital to invest in your company? And the minute you say there's a difference, then you throw out the CSR concept. Because if there's a difference, then that's what fiduciary duty is. So nobody said, including Friedman, that companies have a right to pollute. Friedman never said that. What companies have to do is be concerned about others so that they cause no harm. It's never justified to cause harm to outsiders. Beyond that, they don't have an obligation to a town that because they did business there once to remain there, even if moving out causes harm, because the kind of harm it causes depends on the choices they made earlier that gave the town the benefit of their presence. And so their concern can't be that the town will lose, but rather that they themselves will be hurt by remaining in the town. These people who advocate corporate social responsibility, I never heard them say, well, I'm not going to quit my job because the company will be worse off if I leave. I never heard anyone say that. They basically, what they say is, well, I'm going to leave my job if I get a better job, but the company shouldn't leave the town because the town will be hurt. This to me is not ethics, incoherence. So
Also,
yeah, go ahead.
Professor, what's it called? Economically, in the long term, those communities will, will sustain themselves because their backs will be against the wall. So they'll have the motivation and drive to get
You're absolutely
more
right
done.
about that. You're absolutely right. Back when I was a PhD student in the 80s, there was a whole situation where a lot of the companies were leaving Ireland. That a number of car companies had opened up shop there, and there was deindustrialization. They were moving out of Ireland. And there was all kinds of hand-wringing, and the government invested in like the stupidest car company of all time, DeLorean Motors, but that's another story. And then what they did was, quite simply, they reduced the tax rates, they reduced regulation, they created an economy that's somewhat freer than the US economy. And guess what happened? Industry came pouring in. They've got a healthier economy than we do now. They're doing great. And I think a lot of this is just being willing to overcome the political impediments that stop locations from flourishing. And the political impediments are always like handouts to special interests, things like that, regulations, special regulations, and things like that. So you're absolutely right. I agree completely about that. Okay, well, we're almost out of time. I hope you enjoyed the talk tonight. Are there any questions about, let's see, the comments? what's on YouTube? 12 o'clock high is on YouTube?
Yeah, if you want, I can send the link. It's on
Yes, do.
YouTube.
Yeah, I'll send it to everyone. I didn't-
Sure.
Okay.
Just copy this and paste. Let me know if you got it.
Okay, I'll look later. I'll send it around. It's definitely on Amazon. And someone else asked about Amazon. It's definitely on Amazon. It's not expensive, a couple of dollars. Attendance. I almost forgot. Okay. Okay, that's what we'll do with the remaining time. Are there any other questions before I start? Okay, everyone see the link here? I'm gonna click on it. Okay. All right. Whoops. Sorry about that. So basically, I hope that doesn't ruin my my copyright for this video. You know, they might let me show the recording because of that music. But in any case, I'll take attendance right now. And as you say your name, you're free to leave. Minhas, Ahmed,
Yeah, I'm here.
thank you. Yeah, feel free to leave if you haven't done anything further to talk about. Muad, I know you're here.
I'm here, Professor. I'm here. Moaz, I was here.
Okay. Somebody. Dana,
Yes, I'm here.
very good. Okay. Karina,
I'm here, Professor.
very good. Derek? Derek? Okay.
I'm here, sir.
Oh, Derek? Okay, great.
Yep, sorry.
Xiaolin Chen,
Here, Professor.
thank you. Naisha Sherry. Naisha? Okay. Tyler Daly,
I'm here.
thank you. Charles DeBross, I'm sorry, DeBross.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Charles. Caitlin Dingman,
Here.
thank you. Reham Elbakatashi,
I'm here.
thank you, Reham. Fatima Faria,
I'm here.
thank you, Fatima. Josanne Frazier,
I'm here.
thank you. Raquel Gray,
Here.
thank you. Gabriella Huggins,
I'm here, and it's Gabrielle.
okay, Gabrielle. Brian Joseph,
I'm here, Professor.
thank you. Maimuna Kabir,
Here.
thank you. Salma Kahanam. Salma? Okay, Catherine Kim,
Here.
thank you. Clinton Kenyeti,
I'm here.
thank you. Ilya Korolev, thank you, Ilya. Billy Kryam,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
thank you, Billy. Christina Kachenko. Christina? Christina? Is that C, is that C for Christina? I'm trying to. Okay, we'll get back to Christina. Shanice,
Professor, did you call my name?
who is this?
Nahima?
What's your last name?
Sultana?
I didn't get to you yet. I'm still on.
Hi, Professor. This is Shanice. I'm here.
Okay, Shanice, thank you. Alex Lee,
Here, Professor.
Ava Luke,
Here.
thank you. Lisbeth,
Here,
Lisbeth, thank
Professor.
you. Okay. Kevin Matacastro,
Here, Professor.
thank you, Kevin. Barbara Mendick,
I'm here, Professor.
thank you, Barbara. Leonie Miller. Leonie. Okay, absent. Jacqueline Mills.
I'm here.
Okay, Jacqueline, great. Judy Mizrachi,
I'm here.
thanks, Judy. Jessica Moon,
I'm here.
thanks, Jessica. Oriana Mora,
I'm here.
thank you. Hamza Nadim. Hamza? Okay. Oh, that's Hamza, okay.
Yeah.
Anthony Nagoyan,
Here.
thank you, Anthony. Diana Owusu. Diana? Diana? Okay. Sabita Pecchiari,
I'm here.
thank you, Sabita. Sapir Rafaelov. Sapir,
Right here.
thank you. Shakira Risher,
I'm here, Professor.
Shakira. Eliza Silks. Eliza. Okay, Anastasia Stepanova. Anastasia. Zixuan Su,
Here.
thank you. Nahima Sultana,
I'm here, Professor.
thank you. Rayvon Watson Taylor,
I'm here.
thank you. Michael Williams,
I'm here.
thank you. Bin Wu,
Here.
thank you. Steve Kaplan, I just saw a second ago.
I'm here, yeah, sorry, I missed.
No
that.
problem. Yang Wei Wu,
I'm here.
thank you. And Asen Yagladier,
I'm here.
thank you. Okay, I'm gonna read off the people I marked absent. If you're here, please let me know. If I called your name off already, it's just about 9:30, or, don't feel obligated to stick around if you don't want to. Naisha Sherry, is Naisha here? Salma Kahanam, Salma. Leonie Miller, Leonie, are you here?
I'm here.
Leonie,
Yeah.
okay, thank you, all right. Okay, Diana Owusu. Diana. Eliza Silks. Anastasia Stepanova, Elijah, Anastasia, are you guys here? Okay, that's it. So that's everybody. Okay, so are there any questions that you want to ask?
Professor, I have a question, right? I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions in the class, and I apologize about that.
No
Right.
need to
So
apologize.
the discussion board for today, like I'm doing it right now, speaking about it because I just finished watching the movie like 2 hours ago, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't have no chance to do the questions. I mean, to answer the